If Israel is justified in killing civilians because of the acts of terror committed by Hamas, why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did? Because Israel is keeping 13,000 children. It has tried them in military courts. Since the establishment of Israel, 55,000 Palestinian homes have been bulldozed. So why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did if we use your logic?
So I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to ask you a question if you don't mind. Is that all right?
Grab yourself a drink, get comfortable, and listen closely, because this debate gets intense fast. A student challenged Ben Shapiro with a serious question about civilian casualties and whether Hamas could justify its October 7th attack using the same logic. But Shapiro turned the argument around by focusing on one key issue: intent. Before we break it all down, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we're getting into the facts behind this heated exchange. Capital Spotlight gives you all important happenings in the house. Kindly subscribe, like, and share.
Hi. If Israel is justified in killing civilians because of the acts of terror committed by Hamas, why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did? Because Israel is keeping 13,000 children. It has tried them in military courts. Since the establishment of Israel, 55,000 Palestinian homes have been bulldozed. So why isn't Hamas justified in doing what it did if we use your logic?
So I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to ask you a question if you don't mind. Is that all right? So my answer is that Israel would not be justified in killing Palestinian civilians because of the actions of terrorists. Israel would be justified in attempting to kill terrorists, and civilian casualties are a cost of war. That is just a reality of life. During World War II, there were 70,000 Brits who died during the Blitz bombing, and there were 2 million Germans who died, civilians who died during World War II. And I don't see a lot of monuments in Britain because of the 2 million civilians who died in Germany. The costs of war are brutal, they're terrible, they're horrifying. There's a vast difference in moral scope between deliberately going into a civilian area and murdering everyone you can find and trying to kill a terrorist who is deliberately hiding beneath a civilian area, hiding their rockets in civilian areas, starving their own people. There is a vast difference. Okay, so now I get to ask my question, if you don't mind. So my question is, do you believe that there is a moral difference between Hamas going into, for example, Kfar Aza and murdering entire families, and Israel attempting to target terrorists and accidentally hitting civilians?
Israel is effectively doing the same because Gaza is the most densely populated region in the world. There are 15,000 people per square mile.
So does Hamas get immunity because they're there? So Hamas gets immunity. So
Israel has killed 3,500 children in the past 3 weeks. That's more children. That's more children than have died in conflicts around the world in each of the last 4 years.
So just to be clear, your logic is that if you're a terrorist group located in a densely populated community and you hide behind civilians, you're now immune.
Where are the children meant to go?
So you're immune. Okay. That's a violation of the Geneva Conventions, but okay. You're now immune. Your logic is that if you're a Hamas terrorist...
Sorry, since 2005, 23 out of every 24 conflict deaths have been Palestinian. I don't see any moral equivalency there. It's clearly unjust what the IDF has been doing to the Palestinians because there's a vast disparity between the number of Palestinians being killed and the number of Israelis.
I mean, I would certainly hope that Israel is killing more Hamas members.
This isn't a conflict. This isn't a conflict. This is one-sided ethnic cleansing.
So, again, I'm just asking you, if based on the numbers, more Germans died than Brits in World War II, did that mean that the British were wrong in World War II? Because they did. Many more Germans died than Brits. Based on the numbers, does that mean that Britain was wrong in World War II?
Britain wasn't bombing civilians. There's a clear difference.
You should talk to the people in Dresden, but you can't because they're dead.
There's a clear difference. Well, I agree that war is horrible, but this is not a just war. What Israel is doing is not a just war. There is a difference between fighting the Nazis.
So it is not a just war.
Fighting the Nazis.
It is not a just war when you fight a war against people who murder 1,500 of your civilians and take 233 of them, at last count, captive into tunnels. It is not a just war to obliterate them. Please name a just war.
Israel's been killing civilians for the past 75 years, and there was no headlines about it, and nobody said that the Palestinians were
Israel
justified
does not purposefully kill civilians. Palestinian terrorists do.
Israel has not purposefully killed civilians. Are you willing to stand by that statement?
If Israel put down its guns tomorrow, there would be a second Holocaust. If the Palestinians put down their guns tomorrow, there would be a Palestinian state. That is the reality. And let me ask you this.
There would not be a Palestinian settlement.
I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you. I'm just going to ask you the last question. The same question I asked her. Which part of Palestine is occupied?
the entirety of Palestine.
There we
But
go.
I'm not
Thank you
calling
once
for
again.
the destruction of Jews.
I appreciate you expressing your full genocidal intent
Why-
for the Jewish people living between the river
Why
and
is it genocidal to call for a state that is not apartheid? You can have a state where all citizens have equal rights, Jews and Muslims.
I'm sure that's going to go
That's
amazingly
not genocidal.
under the same people who are governing the Gaza Strip, where currently zero Jews live.
In the time, can we move on to the next question, please?
The debate opened with a serious question. If Israel can be justified in using military force even when civilians are killed, why should Hamas be condemned for its actions? The student pointed to Palestinian civilian deaths, children, destroyed homes, and decades of conflict. Those are serious issues that deserve serious discussion. Civilian suffering should never be dismissed, regardless of which side is responsible. But Ben Shapiro's response was that there is a fundamental difference between deliberately targeting civilians and targeting an armed group while civilians are present in the area. That distinction is extremely important. Hamas's October 7th attack involved deliberately attacking Israeli civilians and taking hostages. Shapiro argued that this cannot be morally equated with an operation whose stated target is an armed organization, even when civilians are tragically caught in the fighting. Now, this does not mean every Israeli military action is automatically justified. Governments and militaries can be criticized, and civilian casualties raise legitimate questions about proportionality, necessity, and the conduct of war. But here is where I think the debate becomes important. You cannot simply look at the number of people killed and declare the side with more casualties automatically guilty. Morality in war also involves asking who initiated the attack, what the intended targets were, whether civilians were deliberately targeted, and whether military forces are taking precautions to reduce civilian harm. The student then argued that Gaza's population density makes civilian casualties unavoidable. That raises another difficult question. If an armed group operates from heavily populated areas, including locations close to civilians, does that make the armed group impossible to attack? Obviously, the answer cannot simply be that civilians become legitimate targets. International humanitarian law exists precisely because civilians must be protected. At the same time, the presence of civilians does not automatically give an armed organization immunity from military action and equal rights without calling for the destruction of Israel. And that distinction matters. As a conservative commentator, I believe the United States should be willing to criticize any government when necessary. But I also believe that deliberately targeting civilians, kidnapping civilians, or celebrating terrorism should never become acceptable simply because the perpetrators claim to be fighting for a political cause. You can support Palestinian civilians without supporting Hamas. You can criticize Israeli policies without supporting terrorism. And you can believe Israel has a right to exist while still demanding that civilian life be protected. That is the kind of nuance that often disappears when political debates become completely driven by emotion. The strongest part of Shapiro's argument was his insistence that intent matters. If an organization deliberately attacks civilians, that is fundamentally different from a military operation directed at combatants where civilians are unintentionally harmed. But that principle has to apply consistently. Any military force must still be accountable for how it conducts operations and for whether it takes reasonable measures to protect civilians. So, was this debate as simple as the video makes it sound? No. The Israel-Hamas conflict is enormously complicated, and there are legitimate humanitarian questions on all sides. But one thing should remain clear: the suffering of civilians should never be used as an excuse for deliberately murdering civilians. That is the standard I believe should apply to everyone. The real question isn't simply, who has more casualties? The real questions are, who is deliberately targeting civilians? Who is taking hostages? Who is using civilians as part of its military strategy? What precautions are being taken to protect innocent people? And what political solution can actually produce lasting security and freedom? Those are much harder questions than simply choosing a side. And that's exactly why debates like this deserve to be watched carefully rather than reduced to a few viral clips. If you believe political debates should be judged by facts, consistency, and moral principles rather than emotion, let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more political commentary and congressional coverage.